Rain stitched the city into gray threads the morning they tried to erase 27 years of my life with a manila envelope. Carson Vickery didn't toss it. He slid it across the glass like a casino dealer pushing chips he'd already decided were his. Behind him, the storm hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of cold autumn rain that smells like metal and goodbyes. He looked exactly like the magazines want executives to look. Thin tie, expensive watch, hair that had never met sweat, while he said words he'd only ever say to other people. "We're restructuring," Carson murmured, voice polished down to nothing sharp enough to cut. "Sign the severance by Friday, or get nothing." I didn't blink. "Understood," I said, and the minute I watched his mouth falter, just a fraction, like a fisherman watching a line go slack, I knew I'd already taken something back from him. "My name is Leonard Abrams. I turned 60 this year. For 27 of them, I worked at Iron Ridge Components, a warehouse and distribution outfit for fasteners and hardware that kept half the Midwest screwed together in storms and sunshine. In 11 days, I was set to collect a $94,000 retirement bonus. 11 days. Instead, I was standing in a room that smelled like disinfectant and disinterest, told it was all over because a man 6 months into his job could pronounce the word efficiency without blushing. I took the envelope. I thanked him. I left. When the door clicked behind me, I felt the building's bones. The humming forklifts, the rattle of loading dock chains, the clatter of pallets settling in their racks. I had felt those sounds in my ribs for almost 3 decades in fires and recessions, through 3 computer overhauls that promised to reinvent everything and mostly destroyed Mondays. I'd been the guy who showed up when water lines froze at 3 a.m., who talked city inspectors off the ledge with code books and coffee, who trained kids who'd never held a torque driver to do the real math of hands and weight and safety. I packed slowly like you do when you're handling glass because you are. The mug my daughter gave me that says World's Okayest Griller. The photo of my wife Helen at the 2015 company picnic, laughing next to the potato salad like joy was the easiest thing she knew. The little stack of safety awards I always pretended not to care about. A brass caliper I bought the week I was hired and never stopped keeping in my top drawer. Tommy Rodriguez slid into my doorway, cap in hand, grease on his knuckles. I trained him the year his oldest was born. "This ain't right, Mr. Abrams," he said, eyes flicking toward the hallway, where news travels faster than forklifts. "Everybody knows you got 11 days. Everyone knows. Sometimes the clock runs weird." I told him, "Don't let them make you late for your break, Tommy." He swallowed, nodded, and backed away like a man leaving a hospital room. At the security desk, Pete Williams pretended to find something very important at knee level. He'd worn that uniform almost as long as I'd worn my name badge. We shook hands without looking at each other, because that's how men keep tears in their heads. I drove home in rain that sounded like nails in a jar and let myself think on the way. The thinking didn't scare me. I've always been a planner. Plans don't care about weather. I started at Iron Ridge when I was 33 and out of the Army, with a wife who was braver than anything I've ever done and a baby that turned our little apartment into a cathedral. I just wanted a job where I could hold a wrench and sleep at night. It was supposed to be a few months. It became a life. Not glamorous, not famous. But if you want your city to stand, you need men who know how to read a palette manifest by the feel of it and the weight of it and the way the ink smears at 2 a.m. Back then, everything ran on clipboards and shoe leather. When we grew from 1 building to 4, I helped lay out the aisles with chalk and tape like we were marking a basketball court. When the first computer system came wheezing in the door, I was the one who sat next to the old-timers and turned the blinking cursor into something that didn't frighten them. I wrote training sheets by hand until the ink bled from the sweat of carrying boxes up mezzanine stairs. I took pride in the kind of thing nobody posts about, a warehouse that runs silent because nothing's going wrong. Then came the board's new darling, modernization. They said the word like a spoonful of medicine they weren't going to taste. They brought in Carson Vickery, fresh from a software outfit in Cincinnati, MBA varnish still drying. A man who said data-driven like a prayer and legacy like a diagnosis. He wanted dashboards. He wanted quarterly OKRs and warehouse gamification, and a safety committee that met monthly instead of weekly because accident trends are lagging indicators, not real-time insights. Our first meeting was called Strategic Alignment. What it was, an inventory of old furniture he planned to throw out. He asked me why we still used paper logs for certain critical counts. I told him because paper still works in a blackout. He asked why we held weekly safety huddles. I told him because habits are built in 7-day loops and because hearing the same thing out loud is how young men learn to keep all their fingers. He asked why we hadn't automated half the floor. I told him because a robot doesn't know the sound a bearing makes 5 days before it fails. He smiled and wrote something in his notebook. I've been in enough rooms to know what bosses write when they've decided you're part of the problem. The line's short and neat. It ends with a box they check. Weeks passed. The restructuring started like frost. Early retirements. Performance plans that came out of nowhere for people I'd never had to correct for the same mistake twice. A forklift driver let go for insubordination after he refused to lift a pallet with a cracked deck. The kind of firings that look good in a spreadsheet's margin and look terrible in a hallway where men still carry one another on their backs when the world gets heavy. Felicia Tran from HR caught me in the parking lot one evening, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup like it was a life preserver. We'd worked together long enough to skip the fluff. "Leonard," she said, eyes sliding to make sure nobody was near. "You might consider accepting early retirement. He keeps asking about your comp package." He asked for the retirement policy. Twice. I told her I had 11 days. She said, "That's why I'm talking to you." I should have listened. Pride is a good jacket in the cold and a bad one in a fire. At home, I spread the papers on Helen's old oak table. The house was quiet in the way houses are when someone you love used to fill every room with tiny vibrations. Helen's scarf still hangs by the door. I haven't been ready to move it. Some things go where they go, and you live around them. The severance was an insult with a bow on it. 6 weeks' pay and 3 months of health insurance, in exchange for a 2-year non-compete that would handcuff me to my recliner and a non-disparagement clause that would make me swallow the truth forever. It was obscene, but I'd seen worse. The part that told me how to fight wasn't in the severance. It was in the middle of a binder I helped write years ago. Back in '09, after a recession that nearly turned our warehouse into a bowling alley, we negotiated language to stop a different kind of robbery. Mr. James Mitchell, the old CEO who wore the same brown blazer for 20 years and knew the birthdays of 300 employees, asked me to help draft policies that kept decent people from getting tossed 2 weeks before vesting. I turned pages, smelling dust and toner, until I found it. Policy 4.7b Retirement Benefit Protection. No employee within 30 days of eligibility for retirement bonuses or vesting milestones shall be terminated absent documented gross misconduct. Layoffs or restructuring actions within this 30-day window constitute breach of contract and expose the company to damages and equitable relief, including reinstatement and back pay. I read it 3 times. Then I called my nephew, Mitchell Goldstein, who grew up chasing my daughter around Thanksgiving tables and grew into a labor attorney who can smell a scam like a mechanic smells a bad fuel pump. "Uncle Leonard?" he said, answering on the 3rd ring. "Everything okay?" "Got a situation," I told him, and I laid it out. Timing, paperwork, the envelope, the policy, the offer, the non-compete. He didn't interrupt often. When he did, it was to ask for dates and names like a man drawing a map while the city burns. "Don't sign anything," he said finally. "Scan everything. Email it tonight. And if you can, print every internal memo you can access. This smells like a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" "The kind that costs more than 94 grand. The kind the EOC likes to read about." I slept in my work boots that night by accident. Habit. Woke before dawn. Drove to Columbus. To a downtown office with carpets that drink your footsteps and a receptionist who knows how to be kind in a way that shouldn't be rare and is. Mitchell stood with a legal pad thick enough to bruise an ego. He slid my old policy binder next to my severance. "They stepped on a landmine you installed," he said. "If Carson is doing this to multiple people, we're talking breach of contract, yes. But also age discrimination if he's targeting folks approaching retirement milestones." He tapped the policy. 30-day protection. They fired you at day 11. This isn't gray. This is neon. "Felicia tried to warn me," I said. "Good. We're going to give her a chance to do the right thing before we make a federal case out of their bad decisions. He sent me back to Dayton with 3 instructions. Don't sign, don't shout, and don't stop printing. Paper, he said. Doesn't forget. Wednesday morning, I walked into the warehouse early to gather my things and to pull emails while my login still worked. That's when Carson materialized in the hallway like a fire drill alarm. Sudden, unwelcome, loud without being loud. "Leonard," he said, like we were old friends. "Got a minute?" His office looked like a catalog for people who rent personalities. Glass, chrome, desk big enough to park a Civic. He slid a revised agreement across the table, manila again, like he thought the color was holy. "I've been thinking about how much you've contributed," he said. "We're prepared to double your severance to 12 weeks. But it needs to be signed today. After that, we revert." "Why the rush?" I asked. He smiled with all his teeth. "I want you taken care of." I thought about Helen's scarf by the door, about paper that doesn't crash, about safety talks that repeat the same 3 sentences because hands matter more than slogans. "I appreciate the offer," I said, and stood. "I'll need time." He watched me leave the way a hawk watches a field that used to be full of mice. By 4 o'clock, I had 47 pages in my truck. By 5, I walked back to his office, told him I wasn't ready, and watched his smile fracture into the line stress draws when it's tired of being hidden. At 7:02 the next morning, Mitchell called like a man who'd slept at his desk. "Uncle Leonard," he said, "you're not alone. I found 7 more. 7 what?" "Terminations within 60 days of vesting or retirement milestones in the last 8 months. All over 55. All dressed up as performance or restructuring. I spoke to 3. 2 are ready to fight. And 1, George Murphy in quality, recorded Carson." "Recorded him?" My heart bit down hard. Mitchell took a breath that sounded like a smile. "You're going to want to hear this. George lived in Kettering in a 1-story with a flag and a front garden mulched like a promise. He'd been the most careful man in our building for 32 years, the kind who hears a bearing whispering failure a week before your plant manager hears it scream. He poured me coffee with hands that still remembered engines. Then he pulled out his phone, scrolled, and hit play. Carson's voice filled the kitchen. Careful, lazy, certain. "We need fewer gray heads and more fresh thinking. I can't have the payroll clogged before Q4. If I don't clean this up now, we'll be writing checks to retirees for the next 2 years." I looked at George. He stared at the wall like he could drill a hole in it with his eyes. "He didn't know I recorded," he said. "I just knew I wasn't crazy." "You're not," I told him. "You're a good man who noticed a pattern." That evening, Mitchell filed our complaint with the EOC for age discrimination and a federal class action suit for wrongful termination and breach of contract. We named Iron Ridge Components and, by his title, the man who drove the train that ran over Policy 4. 7B. He called Felicia, too. Told her we were coming. Told her we had tapes. Told her we'd rather fix this like people than fight it like enemies. "Give me 24 hours, she said. "Please." Saturday, Tommy called from the floor. "Mr. Abrams," he whispered. "He's mad. Brought in lawyers from Cincinnati. He's in the file room. HR's closed their door." "Keep your head down," I told him. "Don't be brave for me. Be safe for your kids." Sunday, Mitchell called with something like relief in his voice. "Felicia wants to meet. Not at the company. Here." Monday, I wore the good suit Helen always said made me look like a man who deserved to be heard. Mitchell's conference room was glass and quiet. Felicia walked in at 10, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She looked tired in the way honest people look when truth has been heavy a long time. "Leonard," she said, taking my hand like a friend. "What happened to you and the others was not consistent with company policy. We failed to stop it. We're going to make it right." The older of the 2 company lawyers cleared her throat and slid an offer across the table. Not manila. White. Simple. Numbers printed in a font that didn't feel like an insult. Full restoration of retirement bonuses for all affected employees. She said, plus interest calculated from the original vesting dates, plus back contributions to deferred accounts. Confidentiality provisions apply to settlement amounts, but not to your right to discuss your years of service or to display your service recognition. Mitchell leaned forward. And Mr. Vickery? Felicia met my eyes before she answered. His employment ended Friday, effective immediately. The board is apologetic. We spent 3 hours turning commas into periods and may into shall. When the pens finally stopped moving, I had my $94,000 and the interest the company's accountants had quietly wanted to forget, plus 2 years of deferred contributions HR misallocated, into a holding bucket that never held anything for anyone else. George and the others had packages that would put their lives back on rails. The class action would pause, not vanish, not forgive, while the company complied with the timeline and the EOC conducted its own review. After the handshakes, after the first breath I'd been able to take since the envelope hit the glass, Felicia stayed back. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have sooner. You warned me," I told her. "And you did the right thing when it counted." She nodded, eyes bright, and left to go do the hardest work a decent HR director ever does. Tell good people the system would try not to forget them again. Tuesday morning, my phone rang with a number I knew in my bones before I knew the sound. "Leonard," said James Mitchell, the old CEO with the brown blazer. "I'm sorry, that's not the company we built. The board asked me to return as interim while we clean this up. I'd like you to stay." I looked out the kitchen window at the maple tree Helen planted when Jessica left for college. Its leaves were turning. I think," I said, "it's time I learned to sit down without checking my phone for forklift alerts." He laughed once, the kind of sound that lifts a room. "Fair. Before you go, I want you to hear this. The board is adopting a formal 60-day shield that requires board approval for any termination inside that window. Every senior manager will complete age discrimination training. And," he paused, "they're naming the policy after you. The Leonard Abrams Fair Employment Protection Policy." "That's too much," I said, meaning it and not. "It's the right amount," he said, "and it'll be on page 1 of every orientation binder from now on." After we hung up, I stood by the window long enough for the rain to become a story I wouldn't have to live inside anymore. I went back to the warehouse one last time on a Wednesday afternoon, not because I had to, but because ghosts walk better when you walk with them. Felicia met me in the lobby with an envelope and a small wooden plaque carved by the same vendor who'd made the safety awards I pretended not to care about. Leonard Abrams, 27 years of dedicated service, a man who stood up for all of us. Tommy saw me before I saw him. Work stopped the way birds stop when a hawk passes, a stillness made of respect. He hugged me hard enough to jar the plaques on the wall. "You got him, Mr. Abrams," he said. "We all did," I said. "Keep each other safe. And if someone slides you an envelope, read the binder you helped write." I walked the aisles, touched the racks, felt the concrete under my boots like a hymn. On Thursday, I deposited a check for $137,412. Bonus, interest, and the pieces they thought they'd bury in accounts with names like deferred holding, miscellaneous. On Friday, George called to say the treehouse plans were spread across his kitchen table, and his grandson had a pencil behind his ear like a foreman. "What about you?" he asked. "I'm buying a small RV," I said, hearing Helen's voice in the leaves. She always wanted to see the Grand Canyon at sunrise. "I think I'll take her scarf. She'd like that." That weekend, Jessica drove down from Chicago with my grandkids and a bag of bagels you can't get in Dayton no matter how many signs say New York style. We ate at the same table where I'd opened the envelope and realized I was supposed to disappear. My grandson ran his trucks across wood that has more stories than we have time to tell. Jessica took my hand when the kids finally surrendered to sleep. "Dad," she said, "I'm proud of you. Mom would be too." "I didn't do it alone," I said. "I just didn't let them tell me who I was." We sat in the dusk and listened to the house remember us. 3 months later, a reporter from the local business journal called. "Off the record," she said, "I've heard Iron Ridge settled with 8 employees and adopted a policy named after you. Is that true?" What's true? I said. Is that paper still matters? Habits still save fingers. And if you write protections for decent people into a binder, you better mean them when the wind shifts. She laughed and asked for a quote. I told her the only one I had. Sometimes you think you're about to lose everything, and then you remember. You wrote the rules, too. I hung up and checked the RV tires. There's a road that takes you west out of Ohio that feels like a memory even the first time you drive it. Carries you through corn and into sky. I left at dawn. At the first rest stop, I folded Helen's scarf into the passenger seat like she was just inside getting coffee. The sun came up pink and gold and ordinary, which is to say, perfect. As for Carson, last I heard, he was consulting. That's a word men use when they're waiting for the world to forget long enough to let them try it again somewhere else. Maybe he learned something. Maybe someone will slide him a manila envelope one rainy afternoon and he'll figure out, too late, that numbers don't hold a building together. People do. If he ever asks, I'll tell him what I told Tommy and Felicia and George and Jessica. You can slide all the envelopes you want, but you can't erase a lifetime by Friday. And if you try, then one of those gray heads you were so eager to replace might decide to open the binder you didn't bother to read, and remind you that some of us wrote the policy for people exactly like us, exactly for days exactly like this. We don't always win, but sometimes we do. And when we do, the check clears, the policy changes, the plaque goes on the wall, and the maple throws gold on the grass like the world is applauding. I took the next exit. The sky was bigger than any warehouse, but it hummed the same hymn. Hold fast, do right, keep going.